Tonight, war in Europe. Russia attacking Ukraine by land, air, and sea. Explosions rocking several cities, including the capital city of Kyiv. Airports and hospitals attacked. Russian forces seizing control of Chernobyl. Dozens of Ukrainians killed and even more injured. Thousands hiding out in subway stations, now doubling as bomb shelters, as many other residents tried to flee. But tonight, Ukraine's military putting up a massive fight. Richard Engel is there. World leaders scrambling to respond to Putin's unprovoked attack. President Biden announcing stronger sanctions on Russia today, vowing to cripple the country's economy. The president also sending thousands more U.S. troops to Eastern Europe, but says American soldiers will not fight in Ukraine. Russia's invasion sparking unified outrage across the world. Protests popping up here at home, including a massive demonstration by Ukrainian-Americans in New York's Times Square. Similar scenes in cities overseas, including in Russia, where thousands are taking to the streets in defiance of the Kremlin. Riot police quickly moving in, hundreds of people arrested. Our Keir Simmons is in Moscow. Plus, the crisis also rattling global markets, the roller coaster on Wall Street today, and oil prices soaring, the impact it will have on your energy bill. The other major headline tonight, 3 former Minneapolis police officers found guilty on federal charges related to the murder of George Floyd, how prosecutors argued they violated Floyd's civil rights. And another winter storm bringing snow and ice to the central U.S. Dozens of crashes reported. Al Roker is here with a look at where it's heading next. Top story starts right now. Good evening. Ukraine under attack tonight. I'm Gabe Gutierrez. Tom Llamas is heading to the region as Russia continues its deadly invasion. Ukraine just ordering full military mobilization to counter Russia's assault on multiple fronts. Key cities bombed and Russian troops taking control of Chernobyl after a fierce battle. President Zelensky saying nearly 500 Ukrainians are wounded or dead at this hour. Video shows droves of residents trying to flee Kyiv shortly after the bombing started. Many who stayed taking cover in subway stations or lining up for hours at gas stations, ATMs, and grocery stores. Across the border in Russia, thousands of people there protesting Putin's aggression. Mass demonstrations held in cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg, but they were instantly met with heavily armed police. President Biden calling Putin an aggressor today and announcing sweeping sanctions on Russia's economy. The president also sending more U.S. troops to assist NATO allies. But back in Ukraine, the damage and devastation is shocking, with no end in sight. So let's get right to Richard Engel, who's there and leads us off.
It was unprovoked, but this is what Russian President Vladimir Putin unleashed on Ukraine. The sun came up this morning. A missile striking an industrial park in western Ukraine. A helicopter assault on an airport outside of Kiev. Close, intense fighting. And there are civilian casualties. Local officials say this apartment building was struck in eastern Ukraine. Heartbreaking images of people bloodied, staggering out of their homes. And this is what remains of another family's apartment. A baby stroller among the debris. We traveled to this Ukrainian military installation near the eastern port city of Mariupol.
This radar station took a direct hit. Russia is picking off Ukraine's military facilities one after another. But Ukrainian troops are fighting back, and Russia is also suffering losses here.
Ukraine says it's destroyed some Russian tanks using American-supplied missiles, that this is a damaged Russian helicopter, and that it has captured some Russian soldiers. On day one, the army has been holding strong, but they're being pushed to the limit by Russia's full-scale invasion with attacks across Ukraine, which is the size of Texas, from areas near those pro-Russian enclaves in the east to the capital Kiev in the west, even capturing the still radioactive Chernobyl nuclear reactor. It all began from a desk before dawn, when Russian President Vladimir Putin declared a special military operation on Russian television. Russia cannot feel safe, develop, and exist with a constant threat emanating from the territory of modern Ukraine, he said, describing the government in Kiev as a junta of neo-Nazis determined to build nuclear weapons. It was a split-screen moment, Putin announcing his assault as his actions were slammed at the UN Security Council, Ukraine's ambassador blasting Russia's representative.
The Russian president declared a war on the record. Should I play the video of your president? There is no purgatory for war criminals. They go straight to hell.
Later, after Putin stopped speaking on cue, the missiles and airstrikes began. Russian tanks rolling across the border from Belarus in the north and Crimea in the south. For Ukrainians, the choice was to hide in deep Soviet-era subways built long ago to shelter Ukrainians from an American attack, or to run if they could get through the traffic heading out of Kiev, or to ride it out, stocking up on food and cash.
How are you feeling? This is your mother.
I'm trying to keep my children calm. Putin is not helping. We are Ukraine, she says.
Putin says he's doing Ukrainians a favor by trying to get rid of their Nazi fascist government. What do you think about that?
He isn't protecting us, she says. It would be better if he sat there in Russia and did not touch anyone or anything here. Ukraine is fighting for its right to exist as a sovereign country and against a man who says Ukraine belongs to him.
And Richard Engel joins us now from eastern Ukraine. And Richard, so far it appears much of this invasion has consisted of aerial attacks. Is there a sense about how soon the ground invasion could escalate in the major cities? And is more of that expected tonight?
Well, unfortunately it is. And this was day one, and a lot of day one was about setting back the Ukrainian military. It has not been entirely successful because the Ukrainian military has been fighting back. But the way that the troops are positioned now, the way they're heading, it does seem like they are converging on the major cities, Kharkiv in particular and Kiev. And if Vladimir Putin wants to overthrow the government, and he's said that he's made it clear that is something he wants to do because he believes that the government here is Nazi and a danger to him, then he would probably have to take Kiev. And U.S. officials say that is probably what he is trying to do.
Yeah, and that's a huge question, when Kyiv might fall. Now, Richard, you and your team have been on the ground in Ukraine for weeks, and we've heard you reporting about the shift in the mood in the last few days. Well, what's the mood like now, almost 24 hours since the full-scale invasion began?
Well, there is defiance. People know what's at stake. They don't want to live under a Russian-style dictatorship. They know what Russia is, they know what Putin is, and they know what they have now. But you can only live on principles for so long. People are also afraid for their families. So while they are determined to fight, and I think the vast majority of people here are willing to fight or resist in some form, many are also very much afraid and are in bomb shelters or in subway stations or looking to, at the very least, put their family in a safer place, if they can find a safer place.
Richard Engel in Ukraine. Richard, thank you. Now to the U.S. response to Russia's invasion. President Biden announcing another round of sanctions and vowing to make Putin, quote, a pariah on the international stage. NBC News Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander questioned the president today, and he has the latest from Washington.
Condemning it as a brutal assault without provocation, President Biden tonight blamed Russian President Vladimir Putin for what he called a premeditated attack.
Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences.
The president imposing harsh new sanctions, cutting off Russia's largest banks and companies from Western financial markets, restricting exports of technology, and freezing trillions of dollars of assets, including those controlled by Russian elites close to Putin and their families.
We will limit Russia's ability to do business in dollars, euros, pounds, and yen.
The president promising to make Putin an international pariah, but tonight notably not announcing what Ukraine's president and bipartisan lawmakers have said would be the strongest financial punishment available to allies, barring Russia from SWIFT, the secure system that connects banks in more than 200 countries.
Given the full-scale invasion, given that you're not pursuing disconnecting Russia from what's called SWIFT, the international banking system, respectfully, sir, what more are you waiting for?
The sanctions we've imposed exceed SWIFT. The sanctions we imposed exceed anything that's ever been done. They are profound sanctions. Let's have a conversation in another month or so to see if they're working.
He says right now European allies are not willing to take that step. And though the White House has said its repeated threats of sanctions were intended to deter Putin from invading,
the purpose of the sanctions has always been and continues to be deterrence.
tonight the president said this.
No one expected the sanctions to prevent anything from happening.
President Biden is also reiterating that American troops will not fight in Ukraine, but will bolster NATO allies, authorizing another 7,000 troops to Germany.
The United States will defend every inch of NATO territory with the full force of American power.
The president warning Americans will feel an impact, with already high gas prices expected to rise even more.
I will do everything in my power to limit the pain the American people are feeling at the gas pump. But this aggression cannot go unanswered.
And Peter Alexander joins us now from the White House. And Peter, despite mentioning it before, President Biden today did not sanction Putin personally. Why not?
Yeah, that's right, Gabe. The president didn't say why the U.S. didn't sanction Putin. He just said it's still on the table, that it's not a bluff. Also tonight, notably, the White House is responding to those critics who argue that the president should have leveled these sanctions preemptively, saying that Vladimir Putin simply could have decided if he's already paid the price, why not go ahead and get what he's paid for? In the White House's words, Ukraine's freedom. Gabe?
Peter Alexander at the White House. Peter, thank you. And now for more analysis on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Admiral James Stavridis, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander and NBC News Chief International Security and Diplomacy Analyst. Admiral, we're less than 24 hours into Russia's invasion, but we're already seeing airstrikes as well as attacks on the ground. What is your assessment of Russia's military strategy so far?
Textbook invasion. It includes knocking out the air defense systems, gaining air superiority, moving your tanks and your troops on multi-axis to kind of break apart the defender zone, creating waves of refugees that become a burden to the outgoing government. The only thing I haven't seen yet, Gabe, is a massive cyber attack. The Russians have that capability. They could drop the electric grid. Perhaps they're holding that back in reserve. Perhaps they don't want to show the United States that capability in detail. Perhaps they don't want to antagonize the people of Ukraine, although that seems like a lost cause at this point. For whatever reason, the only thing missing thus far is a massive cyber attack. Other than that, it's a successful textbook operation thus far.
Yeah, cyber attack, always a major concern. Now, Admiral, President Biden announced more sanctions today, but are these sanctions already baked into Putin's calculations?
They absolutely are. In fact, I think Putin is probably pleasantly surprised that he is not being cut off of the SWIFT system. Peter Alexander was spot on, pressing the president on that. And I think personally, waiting another month to see how this package does, this is the time to lower the boom on Vladimir Putin in the way that he has lowered the boom on the people of Ukraine. He only respects force and determination. I would hit him with the full force of sanctions to include SWIFT.
Yeah, but Admiral, President Biden has repeatedly said U.S. troops will not be sent into Ukraine, but instead to NATO allies on its border. If Russia does take Ukraine, though, what does that mean for the rest of Europe?
First, let's do the U.S. troops on the border. There are three key reasons they're there. One is the obvious symbolic presence of the U.S. coming across the ocean, 12,000 troops deploying thus far. Number two is reassurance to our allies, particularly those who are on the border of Russia. And number three, Gabe, is it's very practical. If we end up with hundreds of thousands of refugees flowing out of Ukraine, that's going to require military capability to manage that, to bring order out of the chaos that would ensue. To the question of what does it all mean for Europe, let's put it this way. The lesson is, as you woke up this morning in Europe, you were awfully glad if you were waking up in a bed in a NATO country, because the NATO alliance is safe and secure. And by the way, if I were in Sweden or Finland, two terrific nations, highly capable militaries who are not part of NATO, I'd be starting to think about how do I get one of those membership cards.
But Admiral, finally, should President Biden be going further with those sanctions? I know you mentioned it's already baked into Putin's calculations, but should the president be doing more?
I think what is important here is coordinating all of the nations, all of the democracies, and creating a kind of waterfall of events here. I would be front-loading as much as possible. You can make the argument, you kind of build a little bit into it over the next days and weeks and observe what happens. But I think the key role for the United States is hit them with our sanctions, but get our allies on board, waterfall those in. Over time, that'll have real impact, real consequence. Don't look for a miracle here. Putin is not going to suddenly change his mind and leave.
Admiral, thanks so much. Inside Russia tonight, some in the country are pleading with President Putin to end the assault, but he remains defiant, as much of the world is asking, what's his end game? Senior international correspondent Keir Simmons is in Moscow.
Protests tonight across Russia in more than 50 cities, according to an NGO. Vladimir Putin unbowed, confidently declaring Russia remains part of the global economy, reassuring Russian business leaders. His comments made before President Biden's latest sanctions announcement. His early morning television address was unscripted and often ominous, saying his security demands were ignored by NATO and America, referencing Russia's nuclear capability, warning if his enemies interfere, the consequences will be such as you've never seen in your entire history. But we found some of his own people are now frightened.
It's a tragedy.
Though others supporting the Russian president. The West ignored Russia. Russia has spoken, this man said. Then there's Tatiana and her 11-year-old daughter Margarita, who live in Moscow. Tonight, Margarita's grandfather is in Ukraine.
She's scared about her grandpa to be killed.
They haven't seen each other for 3 years because of COVID. Now their family's torn apart by war.
If you could speak to President Putin now, what would you say?
Please stop the war now. We are not enemies.
And Keir Simmons joins us now from Moscow. And Keir, across Russia, there have been protests against President Putin's decision to invade Ukraine. Police officers detaining hundreds. What can you tell us about those demonstrations?
That's right. We're now hearing that there are 1,700 arrests across Russia, and I think that number may go up. And just imagine, after all of the crushing of protests across Russia over many years, the bravery, frankly, of any person who goes out onto these streets to protest against something like this, like a decision to go to war by President Putin. And one person in particular who protested today, Alexei Navalny, the leader of the opposition. He protested by speaking against the war in court. He's now back in jail, and he's facing another 15 years in prison.
Remarkable bravery there, Keir. And now that President Biden has imposed those sanctions, what do we know about Putin's next move?
Well, we don't know what Putin's next move will be, Gabe, and that is, of course, because he has that close circle around him. He doesn't use emails. He doesn't use cell phones unless they are secure. He is very, very careful. And that means that it's going to be difficult for Western intelligence to know what he is thinking. And that is a crucial question, of course. One of the concerns is, are the people around him giving him accurate advice, or are they just telling him what he wants to know? Okay.
Keir, thank you. Turning back to the West, across Europe, an avalanche of condemnation and a recognition that today's events are historic. Just listen to what one EU leader had to say.
These are among the darkest hours for Europe since the end of World War II. A major nuclear power has attacked a neighbor country and is threatening reprisals of any other states that may come to its rescue.
And with more on the global reaction from U.S. allies and others, our chief international affairs correspondent, Andrea Mitchell, joins us now from Washington. And Andrea, that was quite the statement from a top EU official. And I want to ask you about the reaction from other EU members. What have we heard from Germany and France?
Well, Germany has taken an unusual step for Germany, for the new chancellor replacing Angela Merkel, cutting off the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which it's an $11 billion project. They had resisted making this commitment, but after the invasion, after those troops crossed over that border, they were not hesitant. They took that action. France also, Emmanuel Macron, up for re-election this spring, has been very strongly, determined to try to find a diplomatic way out. But now that this invasion is in full force, they are completely in line. That said, one caveat: the Europeans, especially the Germans, did not want to approve the so-called SWIFT system being banned, Russia being banned from international finance and commerce. It would deeply affect Europe, much more than it affects the U.S., and it's a European-based system based in Brussels, and so they said basically no to that. And the President Biden, found alternatives. Some of the experts I've talked to, and a number of experts, saying that it still remains to be seen how they put these things into effect. But it could turn out, as he claims, to be much stronger sanctions than even the SWIFT system. It depends on how they're applied.
Yeah, that's right, Andrea. Kicking Russia out of the SWIFT banking system is very complex, as you know, and the reaction from countries outside of the EU has been just as forceful, though. Take a listen to what Boris Johnson had to say.
Now we have a clear mission, diplomatically, politically, economically, and eventually militarily. This hideous and barbarous venture of Vladimir Putin must end in failure.
Now, of course, Andrea, Boris Johnson and the EU have had their differences post-Brexit, to say the least. Are they united here against Russia?
They are. One caveat also, when it comes to London, there's a lot of Russian money, real estate money, invested in London. So he's been reluctant to go against the oligarchs. He was a little tougher today in the sanctions, the second level of sanctions. But everyone has their own economic interests here, and Europe is much closer to Russia in terms of the economic ties, and it's a lot harder for them than the U.S.
And Andrea, looking outside of Europe, what has the reaction been from Russian allies like China?
That gets a lot more complicated because the president was asked that very question. He said, "I'm not going to comment on that." What's going on behind the scenes is really very tentative negotiations to try to see if China would moderate its alliance that was forged on that first day of the Olympics when we saw Putin with President Xi in Beijing. And China has traditionally, as long as modern China has existed, has been determined that sovereignty is sacrosanct. That is what they use to defend their treatment of both Hong Kong and Taiwan and to hold off any foreign interference with sovereignty. So for them, what Vladimir Putin did today was a complete violation of a really important principle to China. At the same time, he is their ally. It's an axis against the West. So I think there are a lot of very quiet conversations to see whether they can moderate China's alliance with Putin and stop China from backfilling behind the American and the European sanctions.
Andrea Mitchell breaking down the complex international politics of all this. Andrea, thank you. And of course, as the crisis unfolds overseas, striking a nerve with so many here at home, protesters are now taking to the streets in support of Ukraine. Many of the demonstrators, Ukrainian immigrants, still desperate to hear from their loved ones, now living in a war zone. NBC's Allison Barber has that part of the story.
Tonight, a striking show of support for Ukraine from coast to coast. In New York City, protesters draping the heart of Times Square in blue and yellow, waving a massive Ukrainian flag. Voicing their objections to Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Russia, go home! Russia, go home!
And urging all Americans to pay attention.
I'm scared by the world response.
Alex bringing his young son, Christina, there with her family too.
It's heartbreaking to see that the world is watching what is unfolding, an illegal war, the attack on a sovereign nation.
Pro-Ukrainian protests bubbling up in all corners of the country, from Los Angeles,
the whole world will never forget this,
to Washington, D.C.,
Biden stand with Ukraine,
to Austin, Texas,
Ukraine is free! Ukraine is free!
to Chicago. Are Jesse Kirsch there on the ground.
Hundreds gathering in the city's Ukrainian village neighborhood, calling for U.S. support to end a war, denouncing Vladimir Putin.
In New York, what started in Times Square spread.
Stop the war! Stop the war!
Outside the Russian consulate, a small but emotional gathering. But no matter the size of the group, the message was the same. Ukraine is more than its borders.
We have been a people way before Moscow were a people. We have churches, we have culture, we have over a thousand-year history. Get out of Ukraine.
I still have childhood friends that live in the village near Poltava. They are young professionals like me. Up until yesterday, they were going to work. I have a pregnant friend in Poltava who can't go to the hospital right now to check up on her baby.
And for so many of them, every missile, every gunshot hits home.
We were on the phone actually with my grandma, but they went in an underground bunker. But once they heard the boom, the internet service completely cut out, and that was the last we heard from them from now, and we still haven't heard from them again. But we're really hoping for the best, and it's honestly just a terrible time.
And our thoughts are with those families. Hopefully their loved ones are okay. Allison Barber, thank you for that report. Now to the financial markets. The Russian invasion of Ukraine being felt across the U.S. economy. The markets rallying into the close despite declines seen earlier in the day. The Dow, S&P 500, and NASDAQ all rebounding big time after President Biden announced a new set of economic sanctions. Also, global oil prices soared above $100 a barrel, causing U.S. gas prices to continue to rise. The average gas price around $3.50 a gallon nationwide. Now let's bring in CNBC contributor Ron Esana to help break this all down for us. And Ron, it seems like the markets took a sigh of relief today after President Biden announced less aggressive sanctions than might have been expected. He didn't ban Russia from the SWIFT banking system or order sanctions on President Putin personally. Are you surprised by the market's big reversal today?
Well, in a certain sense, Gabe, yes, and in a certain sense, no. I mean, the market's been down effectively all year now, with the Dow and the S&P pulling back as much as 10, in the case of S&P, even 14% from its most recent high. The NASDAQ was down as much as 20% this morning. And so the market in Wall Street jargon is oversold. We've seen a lot of selling into the invasion. And we saw, again, as you said, with the sanctions not being quite as draconian as some had feared, the market rallied back. Now, whether or not this rally holds is an open question. We have not seen the full effect of sanctions. As you say, Russia's not been disconnected from SWIFT, nor has Vladimir Putin himself been sanctioned. And there's still more to do. We've not seen asset seizures of Russian oligarchs and things like that. So there could still be more downside. And the market's also facing the potential for rising interest rates from the Federal Reserve. So those two things are still out in front of us. And that might have been, just as you suggested, a bit of a relief rally for the moment.
And Ron, also, the president said he's going to try to do everything in his power to limit the pain at the gas pump. And he asked gas companies not to, quote, exploit the moment. But is there anything that the president can really do here?
Well, he did indicate, and other countries may go along with this as well, as a release of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Other countries may release oil from their reserves. It could cut a deal with Iran, ultimately, that would put another 1 million barrels a day on the global market. And there's some talk that U.S. producers have actually increased their output of late. Frackers who had been on the sidelines for a couple of years now are upping their output to close to 12 million barrels a day. So that could be some relief for gasoline prices. But if oil were to spike higher and back above $100 a barrel, pulled back a little bit today, you still would see upward pressure on gas. And no individual president by decree can lower gasoline prices.
Ron Insano with CNBC. Ron, thanks so much. Still ahead tonight, continuing coverage of this crisis. NBC's Aaron McLaughlin takes us inside Ukraine, where residents are deciding between leaving their homes and lives behind or staying. Some families even fleeing on foot. Plus, guilty verdict. The 3 former police officers convicted of violating George Floyd's civil rights. The reaction from outside the courthouse. And that major winter storm on the move. The Northeast once again bracing for snow, rain, and ice. Al Roker is here with the timing. Stay with us. Back now with breaking news in the federal trial of 3 former police officers at the scene of George Floyd's death. Those officers now found guilty of violating Floyd's civil rights. 2 of them also faced additional charges for not intervening when Derek Chauvin used excessive force, and they were found guilty of those charges today in federal court as well. Shaq Brewster, who has been following this case from the very beginning, joins us now from St. Paul, Minnesota. Shaq, the officers were found guilty on all charges. Are they facing similar sentences to Derek Chauvin? Of course, Chauvin found guilty last year in a state trial. This is a federal case. What are they facing now?
Yeah, Gabe, that is a hard question to answer right now because the federal sentencing guidelines requires a specific formula. And you ask federal prosecutors, they frankly don't know how much time these officers will likely face. We know the charges say and set out a maximum of life in prison, but many experts say it's unlikely they will face and actually experience that much time in prison. But you mentioned the charges that are involved. The official charge is deprivation of rights under the color of law. What that amounted to and what you heard prosecutors argue and now the jury agree with is that all 3 officers failed or deprived George Floyd of his civil rights when they failed to give him medical aid when it was clear that he needed that medical attention. There were additional charges for 2 of the officers facing charges for not intervening, now convicted for not intervening for that excessive use or excessive force that Derek Chauvin eventually used. So this is a jury that took about 13 hours over the course of 2 days to reach their verdict. We know that the jury panel was about 8 women and 4 men, and they took their time and they eventually sided with the prosecution, saying that George Floyd's civil rights were violated.
Now, Shaq, this trial was closely watched across the country, largely for its implications on what this could mean for the so-called blue wall of silence in law enforcement.
Right.
So what are the reactions you're seeing there on the ground post-trial?
Not many of those visible reactions that you look out for in terms of protests or big gatherings, Gabe. You can probably tell how cold it is here in St. Paul right now. But we did hear from the family of George Floyd in a press conference right after that verdict was announced. The brothers saying that this is a good day for them, saying that it's accountability, but also saying that they miss their brother. One thing we also heard from the prosecutors is a point that you heard experts make as well in terms of how unique this case was. You heard them say that this sends a clear message to law enforcement across the country that the inaction is just as important as the action taken, saying that officers are responsible for providing that mental or that medical care and providing and stepping in when there's excessive force used. And that's the message that could be long lasting after this trial, Gabe.
Shaq Brewster in Minnesota. Shaq, thanks so much. Now to a look at a massive winter storm moving east. More than 100 million Americans under alerts. Across the Midwest, heavy sleet creating treacherous travel conditions. In Missouri, several cars sliding off the road. And down south in Jonesboro, Arkansas, ice wreaking havoc on major interstates. Take a look at that. Several tractor trailers overturning. Those conditions not expected to let up soon. Al Roker joins us now with the latest. Al, where's this thing heading?
Gabe, it's coming this way, and we are going to be watching it closely. Right now, as you mentioned, we've got 105 million people from Texas into the Midwest, on into the Great Lakes, Northeast, and New England, all under winter storm warnings, winter weather advisories, and ice warnings. You can already see. Now, here's the freezing line, and those temperatures are just around freezing, and you can see all that frozen precip from Paducah, Evansville, Cincinnati, into Columbus, snow to the north of it. That is going to be making its way to the east as it does for tonight. Heavy snow will move into New England, parts of interior New York. Along the coast, we're looking at some icing, a flood risk for parts of the Tennessee River Valley. By Friday, it moves out, but it's not before it's a slick commute for the I-95 corridor. Rainfall amounts, while they don't look that impressive, about an inch to maybe 2 inches, the soil's already saturated from melting snow, so that could cause some flooding. We're really worried about this ice from New England or interior Pennsylvania all the way into Ohio. Some of it could be crippling. Generally around the Great Lakes, 1 to 3 inches. Chicago, maybe 2 to 5. But as we slide to the east, we've got a swath of snowfall amounts of a foot or better from Killington, Boston, Albany, and only an inch here in New York City and Bangor, looking at 4 to 8 inches of snow. It moves out, and then much colder temperatures settle in. Gabe?
Al, thanks so much. When we come back, GOP leaders gathering in Florida, CPAC kicking off today with many potential 2024 candidates taking the stage. How the Republicans are responding to the crisis in Ukraine. And the oil rig fire, the moment a Coast Guard helicopter began rescuing crew members trapped on the exploding platform. We're back tonight with the latest on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. As Russian troops advance towards Kyiv, civilians face the unthinkable choice to stay or leave their lives behind. NBC's Aaron McLaughlin is there.
The sound of war, not heard in this European capital since World War II. Ukrainians' worst nightmare now realized. Thousands trying to flee the capital, Kyiv, either stuck in gridlock or unable to fill their cars with the gas needed to get out. I'm very, very scared for my boy, says this father. Some families crossed into Poland on foot, their belongings stuffed into plastic bags. This man carrying packs of diapers. While on the Eastern Front in Kharkiv, they sheltered inside darkened subway cars, bracing for the next missile strike.
We were sleeping and my wife woke up and say like, it's bombs.
In the capital, when the sirens sounded, we ran to an underground garage. We were told 4 ballistic missiles had been fired toward the center of the city.
This hotel does not have a bomb shelter, as so many places here in Kyiv do not. This is just sort of an illustration of how people are making do when there are sirens, when there are missiles.
Less than 24 hours into a war that no one here wanted, the psychological trauma is palpable.
Are you scared?
Yes, I am. And I think it's normal. I think it's normal to be scared. It's normal to be afraid for your life, for your kids, for your families.
At the National Police Headquarters, a line of people waiting to be handed weapons. The government encouraging all Ukrainians to take up arms and fight. This man leaves with 2 AK-47s, even though he's never fired a gun.
Do you know how to use that?
To tell the truth, I am not good at it, but I understand. I just need to find some quiet place and figure out how it works.
A nation known for its resolve, now fighting for its future.
And Aaron McLaughlin joins us now live from Kyiv. You know, Aaron, just 24 hours ago, there were so many questions about whether President Putin would actually be bold enough to send troops to the capital city. Well, right now it's again the middle of the night in Kyiv, right where you are. What's the situation like there on the ground tonight?
We just heard from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Gabe, he gave the death toll to the country: 137 soldiers killed, 316 injured in yesterday's violence. He says he's still in the capital of Kyiv. He's still here, and he's urging people to adhere to the curfew, which is in place until 7 in the morning. I can tell you it looks that people are listening. The streets are completely empty as people here are bracing for more violence. U.S. officials say that Russian troops are on the way to the capital. Gabe.
Aaron, sadly, the death toll keeps rising there by the hour. Stay safe. Aaron McLaughlin in Kyiv for us. And as the world watches these attacks unfold and awaits the Kremlin's next move, we want to bring in NBC News national security and international affairs analyst Michael McFaul. He, of course, served as the U.S. ambassador to Russia under President Obama. And Ambassador, the Biden administration stopped short of sanctioning Putin himself, as we mentioned earlier. Why do you think the U.S. didn't go with a full list of options here?
Well, sanctioning Vladimir Putin is more symbolic than real. It wouldn't change his life in any way, shape, or form. There were some other things they could have done, and they chose to do a very comprehensive set of sanctions, very comprehensive, probably the most comprehensive set of sanctions against Russia ever. But I think they left some things because they think that there's going to be more escalation, and they want to have something to respond to should that happen, including first and foremost, I know that they are worried about the overthrow, the toppling of the Ukrainian government at some point down the road.
And Ambassador Putin has been trying to rewrite history, of course, and essentially denying the existence of Ukraine as an independent country. So do you think that gives us any indication of his broader ambitions in the region?
I think he was very clear when he announced this war, this terrible, senseless, horrific war. By the way, 57 civilians also died and 169 were wounded, in addition to the soldiers that you just reported on. That's just the first day. I fear we're going to have a body count every night until this war ends. But he said two things. I want to obliterate the military of Ukraine, and that's why you see him targeting the military. And he said, I want a denazification. And that is a code word, a horrible word for overthrowing the regime. And what he wants to do is replace the regime that came in power in 2014, a democratic breakthrough that Ukraine had 8 years ago. And he seems quite bound and determined to roll that back.
Ambassador Michael McFaul, thank you so much. And again, the breaking news, the death toll in Ukraine rising above 100. Now, Ambassador, thank you for your time. We turn now to our series, Power and Politics, a look at the latest developments in Washington and beyond. Tonight, the conservative conference CPAC kicking off in Florida. Many Republicans considered 2024 hopefuls taking the stage, including Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Senators Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley. But Russia and Ukraine, now exactly front and center. Vaughn Hilliard is in Orlando for us tonight with the latest.
Tonight, with Russia actively attacking Ukraine, the Republican Party's posture toward Russia moving forward now a focus.
Is it any wonder that Vladimir Putin feels emboldened to do whatever the heck it is he wants to do?
GOP party leaders converging in Florida this weekend for CPAC, the long-running conservative conference.
Let me welcome you to the freest state in these United States.
Ahead of former President Trump's keynote speech slated for Saturday, several other potential 2024 presidential contenders taking the stage, though Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and Texas Senator Ted Cruz, potential frontrunners, making not a single mention of Russia's invasion, instead focusing on politics at home.
As Biden flounders, Florida is leading on issue after issue.
We are taking our country back. We are standing up to power. We are defending liberty.
Other conservative influencers downplaying the invasion's significance.
The U.S. southern border matters a lot more than the Ukrainian border.
The Republican Party has long taken a hard stance toward Russia, but then came Donald Trump's candidacy.
If he says great things about me, I'm going to say great things about him. I've already said he is really very much of a leader.
And his ascension to the White House, where he refused to speak boldly against Vladimir Putin.
I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.
Trump just earlier this week calling Putin a genius and savvy.
There are some in your party who have offered soft praise for Vladimir Putin. What do you say to them?
Oh, I mean, that's a mistake. I mean, listen, Putin is our enemy. Let's be clear about that. Vladimir Putin should not be able to roll in and invade another country and get away with it.
But now, other Republicans could challenge Trump for the 2024 presidential nomination, leading to high stakes here in Orlando. Activists here.
When we're looking at 2024, who do you got?
Trump, of course.
Trump. If he runs, you're behind him.
Yep.
Already weighing in on their party's brewing primary battle.
What about Ron DeSantis?
I think he's a wonderful guy. He has what it takes, but I think he needs a couple more years until he makes a full commitment to presidential race.
You know, if President Trump steps in and runs, I think that, the party will be in complete support of him.
And Vaughn Hilliard joins us now live from Orlando. Vaughn, I understand you just spoke with Senator Ted Cruz after his speech. You mentioned in your story Cruz didn't talk about Russia or Ukraine on stage. But what did he say to you about it?
Yeah, I did, Gabe. And he said in reference to the Biden administration's response this week, quote, too little, too late, saying that he and the Senate have been pressing for sanctions to be placed on the company that is building that major Russian gas pipeline, which Biden had declined to do up until this week. The big question, though, for Cruz and every lawmaker, Republican and Democrat now is what's next. Tomorrow here at CPAC, Marco Rubio and Mike Pompeo will be among those taking the microphone. Gabe?
Vaughn Hilliard in Orlando. Vaughn, thanks so much. Turning now to money talks, what consumers and investors need to know. The crisis in Ukraine will, of course, be felt in American households. Oil prices surging above $100 a barrel for the first time since 2014. and it will send already high energy prices here in the U.S. soaring. Dasha Burns is in upstate New York with this story.
As explosions and troop movements rock Ukraine, the impact of the now years-long crisis already being felt closer to home. The uncertainty in the region threatening to catapult already steep energy prices sky high.
Families owe about $21 billion right now on the utility bills. In a normal year, it's about $12 billion.
1 in 5 Americans struggled to pay their energy bill in full at least once in 2021, according to a December study by Help Advisor. And it doesn't appear that Americans can expect much relief in 2022.
You kind of keep looking over your shoulder as an oil analyst in scenarios like this.
Russia is a major producer in the global supply of oil.
All that's going to come back to raise prices for American consumers.
The cascading effects of the crisis leading from Kiev all the way here to the Woodstock Animal Sanctuary in High Falls, New York.
What happened when you took a look at your gas and electric bill last month?
Normally that bill for the month of January, as of last year, was like $2,900. This year it was $8,900.
$8,900.
Yeah. We just panicked because sure, maybe we can find a way to pay that bill once, but is this the new normal?
That uncertainty intensifying as the Biden administration and other Western leaders retaliate against Russia with sanctions.
American oil and gas companies should not exploit this moment to hike their prices to raise profits.
Inflation for all goods already at 40-year highs. Now, experts saying Americans should prepare for commodities like grains and metals and energy prices to keep going up.
You can't plan for this kind of market instability. It's too enormous. It's too huge. Prices could easily go from about $95 a barrel for oil to $125. We don't know.
Did you ever think that a decision Vladimir Putin might make could impact your pigs?
No. Yeah, when you're thinking about your career and you're like, I really, really want to rescue animals and I really want to work for a farm sanctuary, you usually don't think about Vladimir Putin, but now we have to.
But here we are.
Gabe, the experts I've spoken with say that most Americans who are living paycheck to paycheck can't possibly budget geopolitical disruption into their financial planning. There are some resources out there. The Low-Income Economic Assistance Program is a federal fund available to help folks pay their energy bills. There are some assistance programs at the state and local levels as well. So folks that are having a hard time right now should take a look at that, because right now it does not look like these prices are coming down anytime soon. Gabe?
Dasha Burns in upstate New York. Dasha, thank you. Now to Top Stories news feed. 2 assistant vice principals at a California high school have been arrested for failing to report sex assaults on campus. The 2 administrators were arrested at the high school in Rialto Wednesday. Police say a 15-year-old girl told the principals last November that she was repeatedly assaulted by a 17-year-old classmate at the school. 2 other girls reporting assaults by the same boy. Authorities say the principals never relayed those reports to police. 9 workers are safe tonight after being rescued from a burning oil rig in Texas. New video shows explosions erupting on the decommissioned oil rig platform near Beaumont. A U.S. Coast Guard helicopter crew airlifting crew members one by one. No one was injured, incredibly. The offshore rig was being dismantled for scrap. No word yet on what caused the fire. And finally tonight, all eyes on Ukraine, where residents there are closing a day of relentless attacks from Russia. Ukraine's President Zelensky now saying more than 130 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed and hundreds more injured. The president now warns Russian troops could reach the capital city soon. Our thoughts are with the region tonight. Thanks so much for watching Top Story. For Tom Llamas, I'm Gabe Gutierrez in New York. More news now is on the way.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.